And we're live again. Let's see how OBS does now. Had to restart. Okay. Back to my brain. Back to my brain drawing. Concurrent viewers, is that just me? Or is there a real person out there? If you're a real person out there, say something in the chat. Don't be a creeper. You're not a creeper. Sorry if there actually is a human being out there. Ah, lordy be. Alright, need to learn more anatomy. And these images are not as perfect as a regular anatomy book. What have I done here? I've got my proportions in all the wrong places. That's okay. Oh, you're doing it again. No. This is ridiculous. Like it never even happened? Okay. Some sort of encoder thing. This is why we learn. This is how we learn, pardon. Why do we learn? To survive, baby. So what would happen if you didn't learn? You'd probably perish. Alright, let's just add some color and erase some of this. Don't like that I have to keep checking this. Is this gonna be saved? I don't know. Whatever. Oof. One of the most wonderful things to me about watercolor is that it is so forgiving. So forgiving. I can erase it, basically. And no, this is not fine quality watercolor paper. I think in the future, when I try to maybe pre-record some of this stuff and edit properly, maybe I will use like nice watercolor paper, but right now this is just one of those proof of concept moments. I want to see if it'll work, if it'll stream, if it'll record it. I don't even know if YouTube saves everything, because Twitch sure as does not, which was a little disappointing, but thankfully I recorded it locally. Am I still viable, visible? Can still see what I'm doing? That's good. I guess I should stay right here. So why neuroscience and brains and psychology? Why not? These are the kind of questions. Oh, Griffin is having a dream. These are the kind of questions that have plagued mankind since we were able to ask a question. You know, what am I? Who am I? Not the where did I come from stuff. I mean, those are also neuroscience-y things. Did you know that if you have certain stimulation or even damage to certain parts of your brain, you can have like you can sort of have these transcendental kind of feeling experiences, like very religious experiences, or also the kind of feeling you might get from doing a hard hallucinogenic drug. Yeah, there are certain parts of your brain that seem to be at least linked. A lot of things are very correlative when we're talking about things in neuroscience. These certain areas of your brain linked to even being more religious, or being, I hope I don't offend anybody when I say it this way, but being more willing to see certain things as, for example, miracles, or maybe intense moments of synchronicity. Yeah, there are parts of your brain that do that. Anyway, why the brain and neuroscience? Because the very fact that I am thinking of my brain and thinking of my neurons, I'm doing that, right? That's making neurons fire. That just blows my mind. It's just so meta. Like the fact that when we think about our brains and we're doing research on our brains, we are using our brains, ladies and gentlemen. You thinking about your brain right now, making your brain go wild. A bunch of electricity firing. It's just like, oh my God, I'm thinking of myself. Maybe maybe when we think of our own brains, it's like your brain looking in a mirror. Anyway. Brains are just fantastic and amazing. I never actually didn't take any like neuroscience class or anything like that in college. However, I wish I did. My bachelor's is in biology, double major in psychology. But that degree was much more like proper biology, and that, I shouldn't say proper, but a more conservative idea of biology. Like we had to did an aquatic entomology class, water bugs. But we didn't have to do a neuroscience class or anything like that. So I skipped it because I was worried that it was going to be hard and mess up my GPA. And for a hot minute, like so many others, I thought I wanted to go to medical school, and yeah, didn't want to be bothered by these things. And now, oh, what regret. Wish I had done neuroscience stuff as an undergrad, but that's okay because I ended up graduating. And I also did psychology, which, gives you some of the neuroscience-ish. I wish there was more, of course. I want more science in the humanities of psychology. That's difficult to do, as hopefully one day I'll discuss some of the techniques and the ways that we actually study the brain. I mean, they're incredibly advanced for today, but if you were to see really how these things work, and what information you can actually garner from them, and what then scientists or news media outlets will turn into fact, you will see that you'll probably just be like, what? Where did you come up with that? How did you get from this little area is blinking and kind of lighting up, and oh, this must be the center of all empathy, that when you look at someone with their toe being smashed, you feel it and know it. There are some areas. Anyway. Back to why neuroscience, psychology, and my journey. After I got my psychology and biology degree, I continued on and got a clinical psychology degree, which was focused more on counseling and therapy, which I thought I maybe wanted to do. And then after even before my internship, I already kind of knew that I wasn't really cut out for that. I actually get nervous kind of talking with people. I mean, it was fine. Like the few clients I had was good, but a little too emotionally sensitive for that, I think. Like I had a bit of a hard time not thinking about that when I went home, and that's because the clients is what we call them. The clients that I had were all fairly high functioning. They were all college students, because this was at a college campus, this counseling center. And I just realized I am not cut out for that. I mean, I have so much respect for those kind of people that day in and day out are listening and helping people through some really, really intense things. But hopefully my skills will be better used somewhere else, because I know I would not be very good at that for very long. I do very much still enjoy helping like good friends and family and things like that, kind of help them think through things and reflect on things, personal growth, all that good stuff. But to do it as a job, can't do it. So got my master's degree and did a thesis on dogs and their, yes, it was a human clinical psychology degree, but did a thesis on dogs and their tail. Like basically, if a dog is nervous, what do they look like? Well, they put their tail between their legs and things like that. Also, what does a nervous human look like? Be a little bit more tight together, bent over, back, not in power pose. So I made this weird little harness to put all the dogs into power pose. And that was my thesis, and I got my master's degree. But then it was like, oh goodness, now what do I do? I very haphazardly applied to behavioral genetics PhD, I think, behavioral neuroscience PhD. Way out of my league, way out of my element, and of course did not get an interview or anything, and was devastated because I had no idea what I was going to do with the rest of my life, because I didn't want to be a counselor and I didn't know what to do with my degree. So I spent some time being a little bit artsy, not doing much of anything. Then my dad got sick, and so I couldn't do too much of anything because I had to kind of stick around where I was. But then when I was finally out of school, that was like probably the first time in my life that since kindergarten, I guess. I'd always been in school, even like most summer sessions. Not I guess in high school, but like in college. So I never really had time to do anything but school, and that's what my job was. So then once I was done with it, I finally, for the first time in my life, kind of had time to explore books that I wanted to actually read that weren't just, I had to read them for a class. And I admit I was never much of a reader. I felt like I was a very slow reader. And yeah, I'd rather be making or doing something probably rather than reading a book. I also, to this day, I'm sorry, I do not read any sort of fiction, with very few exceptions. I can't even think of any off the top of my head. But I started reading some books about, my question at the time was just, what is consciousness? And I honestly, at 22, I guess, honestly thought we had that kind of figured out and squared away. It's so silly. It's so funny. Do you think that? Are there other people in the world who think that? Probably do. But yeah, I was looking up books, mostly in the philosophy, I guess, section. My library card at the university I went to still worked. My ID card still worked at the library, so I was able to still check out books, and I just started reading books on this idea of consciousness and started watching YouTube videos and lectures. Just got more and more into it, and then realized, if I want to understand more about consciousness, I should probably learn more about the brain, and started reading a lot of pop neuroscience books, which were great at the time. They're still great. The only unfortunate thing is after you read, a bunch of those, you kind of start reading the same thing over again. Same thing happens in, statistics. I do stats now, which is another few years down the line after my neuroscience stories. But yeah, a lot of pop science-y books, they only go so deep, and then they all start to kind of repeat themselves, which is so unfortunate. I wish there was like a secondary, maybe tertiary level of books still written for a slightly layman audience. But I'm sure the reason that doesn't happen is because a publisher is like, who's going to buy that? All 15 people who have a little bit extra neuroscience knowledge than the general population, but it'd still be too boring for an actual neuroscientist. Yeah. There's no way to get that book published. So, read as many neuroscience books as I could. Then eventually my dad passed away, which was very sad and all that good stuff. He also did have a tumor in his brain, curiously enough. But I finally was able to move from the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas up to Austin, where there was just more opportunities and more things to do, more jobs too. First job I got was actually as an applied behavioral analysis therapist working with autistic kids, which could never have imagined doing that in my entire life. And to this day, I mean, again, it's one of those things that I'm not cut out to do that long term. I did it for about 2 years, but I am so grateful for that opportunity, and it changed my life. I changed my research interest, changed my opinion of people in general, just everything. It changed everything, and I still am incredibly close to this one family that I used to work with, I guess, for years, but now I'm just like an aunt, or a tia, as I say in Spanish, to these 3 girls. I've been with them for 8 years. Anyway, so I got that job, and then I really wanted to be able to read more about autism, and I really wanted to be able to read the literature. And anybody who is not associated with a big organization like a university or something like that would probably know research articles are expensive, and they are not public access, even though it's tax dollars that pays for most of that research. Anyway, so I needed to find a way to basically get access to this literature, so I thought the best way to do it would be to try to infiltrate UT. And by UT, I mean UT, University of Texas at Austin. And so I started just trying to find ways to hang out and to crash journal clubs, basically. I mean, you don't have to be a student to just show up at one of these meetings. And then eventually I met with somebody who I met with somebody who I met with somebody and referred me to somebody. And they told me I need to get this piece of paper signed by somebody who's basically going to vouch for me, and I'll be like a volunteer researcher or something like that. And eventually somebody did. Thank you, Zoltan, if you're still out there. And he is a neuroscientist, a proper one. I am not. I am just a dilettante of various things. And I worked with him for a little while in his lab and just started devouring research articles related to different things like mirror neurons. That's a very interesting topic. Various perceptual things, EEG especially. There are many different ways to study the brain, but I guess at my core, one of my favorite things in the world is just waves in general. And one really cool way to study waves is human brain waves. I think most people, when they think of waves, they just think ocean waves, but you're not thinking of the wave, you're thinking more of the media through which the wave travels through. What do I mean by that? A wave is energy. It's moving. And in water, all that energy is moving the water, basically, so you're seeing the waves like that. But you can also see waves when it's windy. I mean, when the wind blows and you see trees move, that's also waves. And there's also brain waves in the brain. And somebody one time told me, Jonathan Pillow, if you're out there, but there aren't actually any waves. And I think he was thinking of like a water media. He's a computational neuroscientist, so he doesn't actually fiddle much with any real goop of a brain or of a human. He just gets the data and analyzes it later. Not just, does some brilliant work at Princeton. But yeah, so waves in the brain and EEG and getting into it that way, and absolutely loving it. I mean, I could just sit back and think about thinking for a long time. And we were working on some various things with the insula, this different part of the brain that's kind of, if you're thinking of like that little part, I'm going to get a brain model soon. It's like tucked up under. It's insulated. Anyway, we did some of that. I got my brain sapped by a TMS machine. That's really cool. Hopefully I'll do a whole episode just on TMS, because that is some cool stuff in my opinion. Ouch, that was my knee popping. Then I realized I needed to get my PhD. Well, in all this time too, I was also very, very lucky in that I got teaching jobs. I was teaching at a couple different universities at one point here in Austin, and I absolutely love teaching. That is who and what I guess I want to do, who I want to be when I grow up. But I needed a PhD, and I realized a PhD in neuroscience was going to be exceedingly difficult. And if I'm being completely honest with myself and with you now, dear viewer, I didn't want to do that kind of work. I don't want to sit at a bench. I didn't want to learn necessarily every single part of how ion channels work, even though it's incredibly interesting and totally worth learning about. Just wasn't my jam. So, and even then, I just knew I could never get into at least not a PhD program in neuroscience that I wanted to. And the thing I was interested in more than anything was fidgeting and self-stimulatory behaviors in people with autism. Not a very common field or research kind of question. So decided to take my studentness elsewhere, and I found a program that I could get into, even though it's not, hopefully none of them ever see this, it's not a perfect fit, but it's going to get me where I need to be, because to level up in my teaching job, I need to have a PhD, which is not for teaching, it's for being a researcher. PhDs are to train you to do research, but the only way to get a really good teaching job is to have a PhD, even though they have no expectations for you of research. Such is the nature of academia. So I'm now getting my PhD, or working on my PhD, in quantitative methods. What does that mean? It's like stats light. We're using stats and learning a bunch of the ins and outs, but we are not as rigorous as, say, the statistics department that is doing, intense stats, doing a lot more of the equations. I mean, we're still doing equations and all that good stuff, but we do simulation work where you take some sort of statistical method that most people use to study, for example, the brain, and your job doing a simulation is to kind of figure out where it breaks, where it stops working, where it no longer is going to get you the right answer. Of course, how do we know it's the right answer? Well, with a simulation, you know the answer. You create a simulated fake data set based off of that, and then you try to run all of your methods on it to see where does it break, where does it stop working, where is it no longer appropriate. And so that is what I'm actually doing my PhD in. But in the long run, I hope to be a professor of instruction, or some sort of, maybe at Dell, Elizabeth, if you were watching this, some sort of, what do we call it, curriculum director. To help teach people how to do research, to ask research questions, to formulate your hypotheses, to figure out what data you need to try to answer that question, or be able to ask questions based on the data that you have. So that's going to be fun. That's a new endeavor starting this semester, that I'm going to help create this little kind of crash course data analysis thing. My goodness, I just ramble on. Must be really boring if somebody were to come in at a random moment and be like, what the hell is she going on about? Her life story? Yes. How does one start these kind of things? Anyway, so I teach right now. I mean, I'm a student and I do my work and go to my own classes, but I also have the wonderful privilege, thank God, of being able to teach again, because I think there was one semester that I didn't do any sort of teaching whatsoever. I was just a new grad student. The next semester I was a TA, which was great. Anita, I love you, but I never wanted to TA again after that. I want to be in control. And by the next semester, after the summer, they gave me a teaching position, even though they were kind of like, well, that's for the PhD students, and I wasn't yet. I was a master's student. I'm like, well, that's for the PhD students to get some teaching experience. And then, of course, that summer, like in late July, early August, they were like, whoops, nobody wants to teach it. Will you teach it? And I most certainly did. Made all my materials and everything. And then now I teach both sections of the class, especially during COVID. I had to, here's a little secret. Oh, my green screen is back there. I used to live stream from my lovely loft here. Oh, I have to admit I'm gonna miss it just a little bit. I'm one of those people who is an introvert, so yeah, COVID isn't the worst thing to me. I mean, I don't want anybody to get sick or die or anything like that, and I understand that there's a lot of people out there whose mental health is suffering significantly because of the isolation. I'm very sorry, but I was thriving in that sense. Anyway, so I teach those two sections, and I really enjoy teaching a class called Statistical Literacy, which, you know, is all stats, and it's great. And I get to teach a little bit of R coding, which everybody should try R coding. If you are on the fence, do it. It's great. It's doable. Just probably need a little help here and there. Join in on my class. So as much as I love stats and stuff like that, I have to admit I was terribly missing teaching psychology and neuroscience-y kind of things, because when I was teaching for my like 7 or 8 year break as a student, I was teaching mostly psychology and sociology kind of topics, with a little bit of cognitive psychology here and there whenever I was given the chance to teach that class, and an ABA class. That was really fun. But yeah, and I think personally, this sounds a little snooty, but personally, I think my skills are better used teaching stats and coding, because that's kind of, I mean, I think objectively it's harder than neuroscience and psychology, because though, at least psychology is inherently interesting for most people. If you're in a psychology class, it's probably because you already find it interesting. But statistics, you know, you need somebody nice. I can't stand when I've heard students say that their former stats or math professor was like, half of you are going to fail and this is a weed out class, and just, what's that, man? What's that? Be a better teacher. We're supposed to encourage and lift them up. This is a hard thing. Most people aren't going to be mathematicians or coders, so we should definitely give them the best possible experience. Are we lagging again? Are we doing it again? Come on, computer. Get your crap together. Is this normal for streams? Oh, my leg is falling asleep. Why is this happening again? Let's go back to some settings. This is not good. Be right back again. This is not good. Are we overheating? What an annoying interruption. Does anybody know how to fix it? Comment down below. Are we back? Hey, you were working. Why is this so annoying? And we continue, hoping for the best, not expecting much. Is this Backstreet Boys? Come away with me to another place. Oh my goodness. This is my OBS. This is not YouTube. We are troubleshooting. Oh,